this shift is so simple in a way and so powerful, Brian. I can tell you that this is the truth about poems. They don't fix anything, but they change the way we meet the world.
Well, hello and welcome to this conversation for Lent 2025. I am thrilled to say that today we are joined by Rosemerry Wahtola Trommer, all the way from the San Juan Mountains in southwest Colorado. Rosemary,
This is true. Good morning, Brian.
good
Well, good
morning.
morning. It's my
Uh,
morning.
Well, it's 8:30 a.m. for you and 3:30 p.m. For me. Are you a morning person?
I think I'm an everything person. I'm one of those people that just wants to do it all the time.
That's a good answer. Rosemary, if you haven't been introduced to Rosemary, Rosemary is among many things a poet, teacher, speaker, and writing facilitator. I'm drawing this from the dialogue of her latest book. Her poems have graced many prestigious places and spaces, including the stage of the Carnegie Hall and the pages of O magazine, among many publications. And we will touch on her latest collection, The Unfolding, in a few minutes specifically. But just for immediate context, I wanted to say that it's a collection. Written since the deaths of her son and father in the same year of 2021. It's the poetry of praise somehow, which expresses her willingness or capacity to say yes to the world as it is, even from within the breaking open heart of grief. I first came across you, Rosemary, through your extraordinary daily poetry blog, 100 Falling Fails. And for the last year or two, I've received a freshly minted poem every morning from you, which somehow seems pretty well always to touch me and to speak to my soul. And I simply don't know how you do it, but I will ask you how you do it in a moment or two. But perhaps first, you might very kindly start us off by reading one poem that resonated for me that you wrote and sent in January of this year called The One Great Story.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you for that beautiful introduction. And I'll say about this poem in particular that I was inspired by two things. One is a poem by my beloved friend James Cruz. He wrote a poem called The World Loves You Back. And in that poem, he had a line, there are so many ways to hold and be held. This is something I think about a lot is what do we hold and what holds us? And my friend Augusta Cantra and I were teaching a class about belonging. And she said, what if we assume belonging? So these were two of the things inspiring me as I wrote this poem, The One Great Story. There are so many ways to hold and be held. Like the way the white and black cat holds my lap, even as I hold her small weight. Like the way a woman holds a canyon in her heart, its red rock cliffs and snow thick spruce, even as the canyon holds her. And when I hold silence and offer it my whole attention, I feel how silence holds me, cradles me with such profound nothing, it becomes everything. What if we assume we belong? Then we might find we are held by strands of birdsong, by the even beat of eagles' wings, by the blue moonlight that reflects off the snow. I spent so much time worrying about how to fit in, changing how I dressed, how I spoke, what I did. I somehow didn't learn until recently. Real belonging asks nothing of me, except that I offer myself exactly as I am. I become more myself when I trust I am held as much by shadow as by light, held by the one shared breath, by the one infinite song, held by soil, held by sky, held even by the human longing to be held by the one great story from which our lives cannot be unwritten.
Thank you. When I read that poem, it came through to me. I'd opened up my phone on a walk, which I probably shouldn't have done, but I saw your poem there, and so I opened it, and it was the morning of it had been a full moon, and the moon was setting as I was out for my morning walk, and it was one of these beautiful blue, azure blue sort of morning skies with a full moon setting. It was quite extraordinary and a paper white frost everywhere. And so it wasn't quite the blue moonlight reflecting off the snow, but within that context, those words just, I mean, came alive. What if we assume we belong, then we might find we're held by strands of birdsong, by the even beat of eagles' wings, by the blue moonlight that reflects off the snow. And it was truly one of those moments of synchronicity, serendipity that caught me. And that question, what if we assume we belong, is so powerful, isn't it? I shared it. I shared just a snippet of your poem on Instagram with a picture of the moon. And so many people just said, wow.
Yeah, I love hearing this story, Brian, and I love thinking of you being out there and how it is, that whoever you are, when you meet a poem, and there's that you bring your whole self to it, so that half a poem is the poem, but half of the poem is you and your experience and how you experience the world, but also how you experience the poem. So just for me to get to hear all that you brought into that moment is a joy. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. So I said that I don't know how you do this every day, and I would love to know on any level really how do you do it? Do you have, I sense you do, but do you have a practice, a poetic practice, a practice of life that facilitates this fresh minting of poems every day?
So, I mean, let's be clear, it's a crazy thing to do to send your first drafts into the world every day. But that I think is what I became aware of. I couldn't have done it that way to start, right? I started by only sending it out to just a handful of people, like two, just it was just two people for many, many years. So I started writing the poems kind of as a dare back in 2006. It was just going to be for 30 days, which seemed impossible. But I was like, really? I couldn't possibly write a poem a day for 30 days. How many thousands of days ago was that?
Yeah.
The sweetness of it though, Brian, and I think why I still do it, and the charge or the thrill of it is that really the practice became, can I show up every day and tell something true? Can I show up and just meet what's here inside me, what's here outside of me, and let the poem be a bridge between these two worlds? So that's the real container for me, is just the showing up and saying something true. Then what I found is if I could say something true, then it was always going to be interesting, even if what's true is a question, right? Even if what's true is an imagination. But by saying it's true, I guess what I mean is I'm not writing it to sound good. I'm writing it because there's some real energy pushing through me that's curious. So that the daily poem is a exercise in curiosity, really. And in this way, that I love that you say that most days they touch you. And I'm guessing that the reason is because we are touched by the truth, by one person daring to tell the truth, to be authentic, to be vulnerable. Even if you don't have the same experiences, you've had something resonant, and there's nothing sweeter than the truth.
Right.
So the more we strip away this whatever longing to be good or longing to be wise. If I tried to write something wise and good every day, I would immediately stop. I couldn't do it. But if I
Right.
can sit down and write something true every day, it's infinitely interesting.
In that sense, would you say that the process, the practice itself is as important, if not even more important than what comes out of it? What's the relation between the process and the result?
You're so right, Brian. I call the poem the byproduct
Okay.
of what really matters. And what really matters is that sitting down and noticing, and that wonder, and the quiet that we talked about in that last poem that I read, that sense of showing up to the quiet. The blank page is a visual representation of quiet, isn't it? Where there's nothing there, and then eventually we engage with it, and now there's something there, which is always exciting. Like there was nothing, and now there's something. It's real magic. But this idea then of what do I bring to the silence, but how does that blank hold me? And that is the relationship I think that's been fun to watch, how that changed over the years, how there was for many years, even many years of me being a poet, the blank page was an intimidating place.
Mm.
And now it's a place I love. I love showing up. And I used to be so afraid. What if I show up and it's blank? What if I'm blank? What if nothing happens?
Yeah.
That's beautiful when nothing happens. We want nothing. That's why people go on meditation retreats, right? So that they can go to get nothing. So just kind of learning how to meet this blank and allow it again and again to hold. Again, that question, what holds me? What do I hold, right? How does the silence hold me? How does that blank hold me? What do I have to bring to it? And this relationship is so ever changing, right? It's different every single time, and the fluency that comes when we do it again and again and again, that's the thrill, and the poem is the byproduct. But that's not to say poems don't matter. Of
No.
course they do. I love poems. I love reading poems. I love writing poems and sharing poems. Of course they matter, but I think to say I'm going to sit down and write a poem is almost that's the cart before the horse.
Yeah. Okay. I remember reading that Wendell Berry said that he would go into the woods every Sabbath um, to to be still in the woods instead of in the fields where he was farming. And if a poem came, then wonderful, and if a poem didn't come, even better.
Right. See, I think Wendell I know Jane Hirschfield has the same practice where she'll sit and if something comes, great, and if something doesn't come, okay. But one of the promises that I make to myself is that I will write.
Yeah.
And that is important to me. I tell my students it's okay if you don't, but it is important to me because I think, well, this isn't very flattering, but I think I like accountability, and I like holding myself to this. Look, I know I can write something true every day, Brian. So if I tell myself that's all I have to do is write something true, that takes off the pressure to feel like I need to write a masterpiece, like I need to just write something true. And that I know I can do. I don't think I'm asking that too much of myself when that's what I'm saying is my baseline.
Yeah. And I think it would be liberating to people who would um, love to be able to write but feel that they're not good enough to know that somebody such as yourself talks about or quotes, is it William Stafford saying, lower your standards. If you're stuck, lower your standards. I mean, there's that a lovely relationship, it seems, between becoming free when you lower your standards, but actually something almost better coming through that sense of liberation.
Yeah, it's true. It's so true. And I think that when we start to understand, when we lower our standards for what's good, but when we raise the stakes on what's true,
Mm.
uh, and how beautifully they go hand in hand.
Yeah,
The other thing I was thinking about, what I say to my students constantly too, is you can only do this right. You can only do this right. If you sit down and you show up with your heart and you write anything, I feel like when we give ourselves permission to let anything happen, it's in that state of freedom and playfulness, honestly, that we have the chance to really explore what is it to be alive. That's what we're doing every time we sit down to write a poem. But I'm going to suggest that's what we are doing every time we sit down to create any kind of art,
yeah,
is this question, what does it mean to be alive? Not to answer the question, but to dance with that question, to be danced by that question. And that's exciting. That's ever exciting. And it isn't about making something good. But the sweet paradox is, if you can write something true, then someone else will say, "Oh, yes, they get it, right?" And you know what they'll tell you? That's good. But what they mean is, that's true.
wow, that's so helpful. That's so helpful. Thank you. It matters, doesn't it, that um, we do give space for the creativity that wants to flow through us, even if we feel through whatever we've been told at school or parents or whatever that we're not creative. There is something sacred about the creativity that flows through us that flows through us if we let it, isn't there?
I couldn't agree more. I think this is, and I think you're right that a lot of us have these messages that have been told us, you're not creative, or you're supposed to do it this way, or that's wrong. I feel even still, I mean, Brian, I've been writing poems for what, 40, 50, 40, 40 something years. And I've been writing a poem every day for, well, since 2006, so quite a few, 18 years. I still, just recently, just in the last, a few months, I've realized some other rules that were in there that I was like, oh, wow, that message that you're supposed to just keep writing. You're supposed to write and write and write and not stop and don't pick up your pen. That kind of, that isn't how it works for me. I love to just sit and I finally realized, oh, that isn't a problem. That's not a problem that I just sit. It's not a problem that I like to sit and wait. And I think that I thought, even still, after how many years of writing a poem every day, I still thought, what's wrong with me that I don't do it this, because I don't do it that way. That's why. Because that isn't how it works for me. Okay. Or maybe it does sometimes, but not other times. I just think it's interesting how deep-seated these stories are. Then the thrilling thing about writing poems for me is that to write a poem is the chance to see the story. That so often we don't see these stories that we tell ourselves that it's supposed to be this way or this is who I am. But a poem is a fabulous thing in that it allows us to be both a hero, like we can tell the story of what happened and we're in that story, but we can also be the witness of that and see the larger framework, and in this way kind of see through, oh, I'm not only that, or that's true, that's part of the story, but that's not the whole story, or it just or with metaphor we can continually change the story so that, for instance, one of my biggest practices after my son died, I would write every day, today grief is. And then I would fill in that blank and I would let that blank be something different every time I sat down. Today, grief is a cottonwood tree. Today, grief is a table. Today, grief is a window. I wouldn't know how that was true. I would just But by changing the metaphor over and over and asking basically, window, what do you have to teach me? Chair, what do you have to teach me? I was able to see how not one of these stories was true, how quickly they shifted. And in this way, I didn't get stuck in I'm so angry or I'm so sad or I'm so whatever the story was at the time. I could see it was true, but it wasn't the only truth. That it continually shifts. That as we change, part of what poetry does, or this perspective change does, is it allows us to be more fluid.
Yeah. 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 That's fascinating. That's really fascinating. Can I wonder if you could say a little bit more about metaphor then? It it strikes me that there's such a powerful place for metaphor within what we might call embodied soulful spirituality. So for us in the Lent community, there's the metaphor of wilderness or of a desert blooming or rivers of life flowing through parched lands. And it struck me that as we approach the Easter story too, of bread and wine and how they become sacramental and there's this sort of intriguing, powerful overlap between metaphor and sacrament and it seems like metaphor is a powerful thing used well.
Oh, friend, I mean, it's everything. We just jumped into my favorite playground. So all language is metaphor. All language is. So people who say well, I'm not a poet, I really don't understand metaphor. But if you speak any language, you do, because that's how it is. And essentially, a metaphor is just a frame, and that's how the brain works in terms of frames. So, my favorite way to explain this is with George Lakoff's favorite famous phrase, don't think of an elephant. And the moment we say elephant is the frame that's been created in the brain. Now, don't comes after, actually. By the time I've said don't think of an elephant, too late, right? You already have,
Yeah.
because that's how the brain works. It creates that frame, elephant. So when we play with language just defines so much of how we think. And here's a practical example. When things were very difficult with my son, um, in the last year of his life, I remember feeling like I wanted to hold everything. We're back to the idea of holding. See, here it is. Here's the metaphor to hold. And how does it work in our lives? I wanted to hold it all. This is something probably you've heard too. I think so many people say something, how can I hold it all? And I kept thinking, okay, how do I hold it all? How do I hold how difficult this is and how beautiful it is? And I want to hold the flowers of joy and the flowers of, like, I felt like I was this vase and I was holding all these different stems. And it was difficult because there were more and more stems being jammed in this vase. And I kept thinking, okay, I just want to become a bigger, bigger, bigger vase. How do we become a bigger vase to hold it all? And then my spiritual teacher, Joy Sharp, says to me, are you sure you need to hold it? Hear how subtle it is. I am holding it all. The metaphor is I'm a container,
Mm.
that I'm this kind of finite holding space. But the moment she said to me, are you sure you need to hold it all? It's not like that vase broke. It's more like I realized, oh, what if I don't hold it?
Mm.
What if I just meet it? What if I'm like a sieve and it meets? Because actually, you know this and I know this, we don't actually have to meet anything. It meets us a
Yeah.
lot of the time. So what if life meets me and it moves through as opposed to me holding it all? This shift is so simple in a way and so powerful, Brian. I can tell you that this is the truth about poems. They don't fix anything, but they change the way we meet the world. So for me to change, to me to think, okay, I don't actually have to hold all that. I will meet it. I'll meet it and let it move through. life is a lot easier to live then. It's there's a purity to it, there's an ease to it, there's a lack of effort. So in this way, and so you say like I am the bread of life, right? So we take a metaphor and that is a metaphor right there, right? And what is the story that's involved in that? But then we could take the just chose a very charged one. So let me back off of that, say anything, I, Rosemary, I am a tree. And how is that true today? But then to notice, okay, I am a river. How is that also true?
Right.
And in this way, we get to see how it's a way to continually expand, create spaciousness, create possibility, create potential, and in a way also align ourselves with absolutely every other thing in the world. I promise you, there is nothing that you cannot learn from and be connected to.
Yeah. 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 What if we assume we belong? Um, that I'm intrigued. Can you say something about the relationship from just for a moment between words and images? Because I've been reading quite a lot about the hemispheres of the brain, the left being predominantly the domain of language, the right being predominantly the domain of imagery, of connection, of wholeness, of and all of that. And it struck me when you were saying in terms of your practice that you sit and you sit with and within silence, that there is a a wisdom to that that would probably flow from spiritual tradition that actually through that stillness we allow our we invite wisdom to flow through us and to us um, and scientists may say we're actually allowing the right side of the brain to engage for a change instead of being so busy that we're locked in that sort of left hand grasping, trying to pin everything down state.
Mhm.
Um, could, could you say something about that? Do images, do you think them up? Do they arrive? Is there a sense of receiving in that way as an artist?
No one's ever asked me anything like this before. So I think it, yes, it happens. It can be both ways, right? Like I think it can happen that from from a state of nothing, something arrives. Of course, it's coming out of our subconscious probably, or maybe from grace. I
Mm,
don't know how to say that. I know that I have had situations like this where I feel like images appear. In fact, my new book, the title, The Unfolding, is from an image that appeared to me of this ranunculus that was like opening and opening and opening and opening and opening. And so I think that happens. But if it doesn't, let's just say it doesn't happen, there's no lack of images around us at all times, right? I'm just looking into your room right now and I see a window and curtain and chair and pillow. I see picture frame and uh, ceiling. All of these things are things I know I've written poems about because I don't have something showing up. So I just look around the room and I'm like, okay, what's here? And I'll work with whatever's here. Which I'm not joking, like you will find the picture frame poem and the pillow poem. But in this way, if the images don't show up, but if they do, lovely. And maybe, and this is something I think wonderful that dreams have to offer to us.
mm,
But if they don't, then look around.
mm.
We are surrounded, we are really truly surrounded by information. And an image doesn't have to be something visual either or concrete, by the way. Like an image could be a smell, right? It could be the scent of lilacs. It could be a taste. It could be strawberry. It could be, I just chose pleasant things that I would choose pleasant things, but we all know that they could be quite unpleasant also.
I remember in Robin Wall Kimmerer's books, Braiding Sweetgrass, she talks about the scent of sweetgrass, which is intrinsic to the Potawatomi people's creation narrative. And she says, breathe in its scent, and you begin to remember something you didn't even know you'd forgotten from the beginning. That's,
Yeah, there it is. It's
yeah,
not just the visual world, but the whole world that offers itself
yeah,
to
yeah,
us.
yeah. Thank you, thank you. We should talk about your extraordinary collection of poetry, The Unfolding. Um, you write in your prelude, which is sort of 2 pages long, just worth worth having in itself. It's a beautiful prelude. You say the poems in The Unfolding were all written since 2021, the year in which my son Finn chose to take his own life, and my father died of kidney failure. It's no surprise these losses inform my everything. Perhaps you too have had the shelter of your heart splintered and levered, leaving you naked and raw in the aftermath. And you continue, I've been surprised by what's emerging from a broken and ransacked heart, a growing fluency with love, an ever evolving intimacy with the sacred, a sense of communion with others who have also faced loss. I, that phrase, fluency with love, really stopped me in its tracks. In my tracks, it carries such resonance. I wonder if you would be kind enough to read your poem Grace, which comes from the very beginning of the book, and you say it's the starting point for this collection, which was a walk with your son Finn at midnight, very shortly before he took his life. Perhaps you would read it to us and just give us any context you'd like to.
Mhm. So the poem was the poem that I'd written that night, and we were in Georgia helping my parents move into a new home. So we were, you know, out of our normal element and just walking around and laughing at everything. And it was a special night, but it also had this undertone of, well, I'll let the poem speak and then maybe I'll say something about it. Grace, what a loss it would be to not have been born. So I would have missed a Thursday night, such as this, in which my son and I walk the dark streets in Georgia and watch the lightning transform the sky into pink flares and smell some sweet, unnameable flower and talk about Dodge Chargers and knees and roaches. I swear, it has all been worth it. Every second of 51 years for this hour, in which there are no bells, no shoulds, no other tugs, except to take the next step down the center line, while in the distance raps another clap of thunder. It's been a long time since I read that poem, Brian. Um, and just so people know, I'm okay crying, so you don't need to worry about me. um, it's a, I think the reading it again, I'm struck by how true it still is that, and how I couldn't have known in that moment how true it was that that it would all be worth it. Just for one perfect moment. Perfect. I say perfect, which is just to mean real, right? It was lovely and ominous at the same time. It was it was a moment like all moments that reaches toward opposites, toward joy and toward, there's a big storm about to happen. And so everything was charged, a sense of being very unsettled. I knew how unsettled he was at the time. He was deeply unsettled and it was difficult. And so there was that moment where it was both still fraught and full of joy. And so much of our lives are this way. That's what it feels like to be a human, isn't it? To live in a world that is both absolutely fraught with pain and fear, hurt, and so much beauty, so much love, so much goodness. So this is who we are, isn't it? The ones who show up to meet all of it.
Thank you. Thank you. Peace be with you.
Thank you.
You continued in your prelude how clearly I felt the invitation to say yes to the world as it was on that day. 2 days later, my son was dead, and yet the invitation remained. Almost 3 years later, that invitation to say yes to the world as it is inspires every poem in this collection. Would love to just thank you on behalf of all readers for the vulnerability and the willingness to write your truth in this way, in this collection, and to show up to this moment as you are. Thank you. Do you think that invitation was like a preparation for you, to start saying yes there and then before this greatest challenge of your life was to come?
Absolutely, Brian. Although I don't think it started there. I think
No,
I'm
no.
lucky that I have a spiritual teacher who had been, even before she was my teacher, I knew that she would say this phrase, can you say yes to the world as it is? So this is, I think, the way of spiritual teachings, right? Is that there's a I wish I could remember the name of the man. It's a rabbi who said something. There's a story of how the lessons are laid on your heart, not in them, but on them.
Yep.
And in this way, when the heart breaks, then they fall in. So that, and then I think about this in terms of embodiment, right? How we know things in our head. We know the teachings,
Okay.
we get them here.
Hmm.
And sometimes there's a long ripening process with that, right? Like we could say it, I could tell it back to you, I could tell the whole story about it, but I haven't lived it and I don't know it in my body. And I think that what happened was what happened for me, at least in this case, continues to happen. I don't think we just get it once, but
Mm.
it has the chance maybe to go deeper and deeper and deeper, is this ability for us to, oh, I think there's that moment when the heart breaks and there's this, can you say yes to the world as it is, right? And you're like, really, in this moment,
Right.
the head knows, and there might be this resistance, and yet because it's been so present with us, the invitation is there. And then we know it full bodied, not just here. that's when I feel like,
Mm.
well, I'm just grateful for that. Maybe I'll say, I'm just so grateful for that. To that point when Finn died, I was very aware in those first few days that I heard myself again and again and again saying, okay, okay. It just, I kept hearing, I'd arrive at a door. Okay. I'd put my hand on the handle. Okay. I'd turn it. Okay. Like I literally narrated every minute of
Wow.
every teeniest action I narrated with, okay, okay. What thrilled me later thinking about it, not in the moment, but later I thought, oh, yes, saying yes to the world, there's a certain exuberance to that, right? There's a certain, I was not capable of that. But okay wasn't no. So it was this very quiet,
Mm.
humble, humbled. Um, it's not a verb. There's no verb to okay. It's just a state of there's nothing to be done. It's just a okay, okay. Um, I think, maybe that's real surrender. There's a thy will be done in that, right? Where we couldn't say yes to it, but we're not going to say no to it either. Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe more truly in the book, it's written out of say okay to the world as it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Which will be an incredibly comforting place for others of us to think, well, yeah, that's 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 okay. And what does it what would you say now as you continue to walk with grief and process and all that comes with it? Can you describe what it means now to say yes to the world as it is?
I mean, I don't know that it changed, and yet it changes every moment, right? I mean,
Yeah,
that invitation is here for us in every single moment. Just
yeah,
sometimes we're more aware of it than others.
yeah,
Sometimes it's very easy to say yes. It's so easy that we don't even consider saying no, right? I think the moments that it's difficult that we're really confronted with that invitation are the moments we would rather say no. I don't want this. I don't like this. I want it to be different.
mm,
So sure, I mean, what's been interesting to me recently, just last night, Brian, I had this thought that with grief, I was always aware of love also.
yeah,
That in a way, that grief was actually a really beautiful training ground for saying yes to the world as it is, because I was always so aware of how much I love Finn, how much he loved me, even though he couldn't stay in this world, how loved I felt by other people, how carried I felt by love itself. So I was always so aware of the love that made it much easier in a way to say yes to the world as it is,
yeah,
as opposed to fear. In fear, I often don't feel love. And
mm,
and I've been experiencing fear lately.
right,
And I've been thinking how, how different it is in the body then to say yes to the world as it is when I am not feeling love. So what's been interesting to me is finding maybe this new question I have is how do I find love at the center of things? How is love at the center of things?
mm, mm,
This has been fascinating because I continually find it. But when I don't, I realize this is the invitation to bring it. This is the invitation then to plant those seeds where I'm not finding it, and then perhaps even nourish them if possible. But I'm speaking again in metaphor, right? I'm talking about planting seeds. What does that really mean? I think it means like being kind to someone in a moment when we're frightened. That's the practical application of the metaphor I was just saying. It could be being kind, it could be sending money to somebody who needs help, it could be volunteering at a homeless shelter, it could be, writing somebody a nice letter. I mean, there's so many ways for us to do this, but how do we bring love to a moment when we're frightened? And in this way, I think we're almost like not only saying yes to the world as it is, but helping to create the world that we most long to inhabit.
Right. Right. And broadening that out at this particular time in global history and in these recent days since the tumultuous uh, political events in the US, for example, and even within the climate crisis and all of that, that helps me to think about saying yes to what is not an accept is not simply a sort of blind acceptance of the status quo that but that distinction between love and fear helps me to discern a way within that to bring love to the unloved days.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And you're so right about this. It doesn't mean complacency. Saying yes to the world isn't complacency. Saying yes to the world is the starting point. What's here? That's the starting point. That doesn't mean we don't do anything.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Wonderful. Um, we need to close things out because time has got away from us. But let me just oh I yeah I one of the things that I wanted to say thank you for was I've personally had a journey myself through long COVID for 5 years, and um, its attendant fatigue and stuff like that, and to bring love to those unloved days, and to that sense of wanting healing or wondering about healing. And your short poem on impatience just helped me really beautifully on that. You write like asking the peach to ripen before it has even flowered, this longing to be healed. I wonder, may I ask you about your own longing to be healed and the patience and the different nature of healing that you might have experienced through what you have experienced.
Mhm. Um, First, let me just honor that traveling with long COVID for 5 years sounds like I just honor you. Um, and then saying too, then what I'm about to say about healing may or may not apply to what you're experiencing. But talking about healing in terms of grief, I stopped believing in healing. I stopped believing that that was something that I would even want. It's not like I even started believing it. I think that that was, again, what are the stories we've been told? What's the story? I'm supposed to be healed.
Yeah.
I don't believe that story. Not about grief anyway. What would that mean? Would healing mean I don't miss him anymore? Would it mean it doesn't hurt anymore?
Mm-hmm.
I of course it hurts. How would it not hurt? Of course I miss him. How would I not miss him? Do I want to stop missing him? I can't imagine that. So there's been a shift in the story I tell myself about healing, about is that what I want? I don't believe so. I think, but that might just be that definition of healing, and it might be in just this one circumstance, right? But what I can say is that I want to show up for it. I want to be so open to it. I want to be changed and transformed by it and allow it to in that love that I feel to move it forward in every other thing I do. Is that called healing? Because maybe that is what healing is, but I don't know that healing's the word. I think
Mm.
I just don't know. I think what I long for more than anything, let me try and be so clear and clean about it. Let me say that as true as I can be in this minute.
Mm.
If what I'm longing for isn't healing, what I am longing for is um, an openness to meeting it, a willingness to meet it, this the gift of being carried so that by others and by love so that I can show up and then be able to carry others when it's my turn. Maybe that.
Which you are doing through your poetry, which has opened a space for me. And I know people in our community. It's a great um, it's a great honor curating the community that you're speaking to today, the Lent community, because people have shared deeply about losses, people carrying all sorts of things in terms of the events of their lives. And so the thank you for the space that you open up and for all that you express so exquisitely and vulnerably and paradoxically and beautifully. I would love to have spoken to you for longer about things like the soulful embrace of spirit and matter, which you seem to embody through your work, your love of nature, the rhythms of the seasons, of diving into cold alpine pools and going more deeply into the world as the world goes more deeply into you. But perhaps that can be another conversation. But for now, would you be willing to read one last poem to us to end with?
Yeah, you bet. You bet. This one is called Sacred Ground. Um, it's the last poem in the book, and it's um, I guess I'll tell you that the rooms that I'm speaking of in the poem, my son took his life sitting in a closet, just at the threshold of a closet in a room. Um, so that's the beginning place in this poem. Sacred ground. And if, as I now know, the closet is sacred, and the bare room is sacred, and the sidewalk and classroom and the ER are sacred, then I trip into the teaching that everywhere is sacred. Not only the church, but the alley. Not only the mosque, but the bench. Not only the places in candlelight where the air is pungent and woody with myrrh. I want to worship at the shrine of everywhere. Want to know every inch of this earth as an altar. Every walk a pilgrimage. Every step a step from holy to holy to holy.
Holy to holy to holy.
I
Thank
love that we read the first and the last poem in the book and nothing in between. That's actually sweetly satisfying somehow. I've never done that before.
Well,
Thank
and
you
the
for those quotations.
wonderful thing is that as people buy this beautiful book. They can read it from start to finish. I started on the back page where you very helpfully counsel us to read it as a poetry collection from page one through because there is a schema to it beautifully. So please, please, please buy the book. It is available from where you get books. And Rosemary's website is wordwoman.com. Her daily poetry blog is 100 Falling Veils. Your podcast on creative process is Emerging Form. And I will put a series of links below this conversation. But for now, we are so grateful, Rosemary, for your time and your presence and your art. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Goodbye, community.